Welcome to the Commercial Insurance Channel. I'm Rick Faber, co-founder of Underwriter's Resource. This is part 4 of a 4-part series about how to insure and underwrite garage risks. In this final section, we're going to explore the means and the ways to underwrite garage risks. Welcome back. Welcome back to part 4 of insuring garages. In this part, we'll be delving into just what an underwriter or an agent needs to know about a garage risk. To be more specific, we'll be talking about who, what, when, where, and how. Who are they hiring? Who are they hiring as their mechanics? What level of training are they requiring for their mechanics to have? Do they require their mechanics to be certified in some manner or respect? Are they providing an orientation program for any new mechanics to explain to them how they do the work that they do there? Are they checking for prior experience? Are they requiring prior experience? Even furthermore, checking driver's records because most mechanics are required to go out and do test drives. Finally, are they actually checking references? Are they making sure that all this information that the employees are providing them is legit? Also on the who question is who are they getting their parts from? What is the source of the parts that they install? Do they only use quality suppliers? In today's world, with contract manufacturing done overseas, are they doing any direct importation of parts? It can be very easy for even a small garage nowadays to directly import parts from other countries. Are they possibly relabeling parts into their own name? If they are, they're actually altering their exposure from simply being an auto repair shop to being a manufacturer in many ways. This is something that's becoming more and more prevalent in today's economy, where small companies can actually have other companies make parts for them, and they will put their own label, their own name on that part. And when they do so, they become manufacturers. Moving on to what, we ask the question, what type of work is being performed? Specifically, what type of complexity does that work require? Because the more complex the work, the higher qualified mechanics will need to be. The lower the complexity, the less qualified they can be. But it's important to understand that even though some work may be complex, it does not necessarily correlate with either low or high hazard work. Some complex work, it could be low hazard. Some complex work could be high hazard work. It depends. Secondly, what is the criticality of the work they do? Are they doing work on airbags versus, say, air conditioning work? For example, both of those types of work, they could be considered complex, and they are actually complex. But an airbag actually is very critical, whereas air conditioning is not so critical. Except here in Arizona in the middle of summertime, driving around in 118 weather, you might consider it a little more critical, but it's really not likely to cause an accident. The other thing you got to ask is what happens if the work fails? If the work fails, is a bad accident or a bad outcome very likely to happen? Or is it not so likely to happen? One issue there could be some redundancy. For example, in brake work, if one brake part fails, you've still got 3 other tires or 3 other wheels that are there to stop the car. So there's a relatively high amount of redundancy in brake work versus, an airbag. That airbag, it has to work. There's nothing else to keep that person from getting injured inside the car. Another what question would be, are used parts or retreads sold? Using used parts and retreads, it has a direct impact on the loss potential of a garage risk. A company that is using used parts, there's a higher likelihood that those parts could be defective. Hence, there's a higher loss potential for that garage. Another issue revolving around used parts is it actually increases the potential for rate inadequacy. Here's an illustration about what I mean about rate adequacy or inadequacy for used auto parts. In two columns there's a column for new parts and one for used parts. In theory, a garage will charge more for new parts than they will used parts. So if you kind of take that formula down, you multiply the cost per job times the number of jobs, you come up with the different annual sales figures. Now, if you look at the same general liability rate and you multiply that times the annual sales, you come up with two different premium levels. For new parts, you would be collecting $938 versus somebody who's using only used parts collecting $750. So there is an immediate impact on the rate adequacy issue for using used parts. And on top of that, when you think about the fact that using the used parts actually increases the loss potential, that rate inadequacy gets even greater. Here's an issue that relates to where and how, and that issue is control over the work areas. Now, areas where cars are worked on in garages and the bays are actually very dangerous areas when you think about it. You've got cars being pulled in, you've got cars being lifted up, cars raised, maybe you have some welding, maybe you have some cutting. Sometimes there's a lot of grease around, some slippery areas. So they're actually some rather dangerous areas. Therefore, there needs to be some physical separation from the customers and the working bays. So there needs to be that physical barrier so that customers cannot actually get there into the work areas. Now, there are some situations where customers need to see the work that needs to be done. So is there a policy of only allowing customers back when they're escorted by an employee? In that way, you mitigate the exposure or the potential for that customer getting hurt. Another issue related to how are the garage's quality control procedures. Do they have some written standard operating procedures? Now, I'm not expecting a general garage, particularly a single location that's not franchised, to actually have their own standard operating procedures of how they do all the work. But they could be relying on one standard form, like for instance, maybe they utilize the Chilton books as far as how they actually do the work. A second issue would be, do they have some checklists? Checklists are very valuable tools in making sure that all the work was done and that all the work was done correctly. A third issue would be inspecting the work performed. Is all that work checked to make sure it's done correctly? One piece of advice there is it could be advisable for you to have a second set of eyes do the actual inspection. It's very easy for any of us to make some assumptions as far as that we've actually done the work, and we might be biased or skewed toward actually not necessarily always inspecting it thoroughly. And the last issue is inspection for other safety issues. Quite often now, some garages will be held responsible for work they did not do that needed to be done. If they notice or see some issues with the vehicle that need to be corrected, or those issues make that vehicle unsafe to operate, they need to notify the customer about that, just to protect their own interests. Another issue related to when and how are procedures that govern test drives. First thing there would be, what type of work do they actually have to do test drives on? When you're performing an oil change on a car, that work probably does not need a test drive. And if you're test driving for an oil change, you're probably increasing the level of loss potential beyond what it should be, versus maybe doing brake work, where brake work actually requires that you test them. The other thing is do you have some established routes for test drives? Maybe you pull out of the lot and you turn to the right, and you drive around 2 or 3 blocks, and it's established on which routes that the mechanics will take to do the test drives. Let's now turn our attention to controlling garage keepers' exposures. The first line of defense, and it's always critical, is key control. And the first thing that they need to do is they need to limit access to the car keys for their customers. Now, this could be any number of ways that could be effective. One would be that they actually have the car keys kept locked away from potential thieves, or perhaps, with a lot of garages, when you go in there, you tell them what you need to have done. They take your keys and they put it in a little plastic container and they hang it up, which is fine. That limits access to the keys, but only while somebody is actually in the waiting room behind the counter. If they leave, anybody in that waiting room or anybody walking into the waiting room will or can have access to those keys. And the second is what type of security measures are taken. This is particularly important for parking garages where customers do not park their own cars. Looking over there on the picture on the right-hand side, that's a garage that I have parked at, and the customer, you pull your car in and you leave your keys. They ask when you're coming back and they give you a ticket. And when you come back, you have to have that ticket in order to get your car keys back. And for the most part, that's sufficient. But I was also told, actually by one of the attendants there at that parking garage, was that a customer had lost their ticket, and somebody had found their ticket, walked over to the parking garage, and they collected their customer's car. So as an added type of security, maybe some ID checks in this situation where the customer pulls in, they get the customer's name, and they write that down, and they give the customer's ticket. So if somebody finds that ticket or they lose that ticket, they actually have to show some ID before they can get their car back. Let's turn our attention now to parking lot security. The level of controls needed by any single risk varies. It varies from one risk to the next, and it depends on a variety of conditions. The first thing is the level of overnight storage. If there's more overnight storage of customers' vehicles, then there's an increased exposure to theft loss, and there's a need for more controls over preventing cars from being stolen overnight. And the second is a type of location. Is it a public lot, such as you have a garage is located in a strip center, and that parking lot is actually used by all of the stores in the strip lot? In that situation, more of the exposure goes toward the owner of the strip center to provide the security for the public lot. If they have their own private lot, there's more responsibility that they owe to their customers to keep their cars safe. So if that's the case, then they need to have more parking lot security. And the third thing is to think about is the amount of inside storage. That's good. Inside storing vehicles overnight inside is actually good. It reduces the exposure to cars being stolen. However, it increases the potential loss due to a fire or something happening to the building. If a fire breaks out in the building and you've got 10 cars inside, you've got an exposure of 10 cars being destroyed. Since the primary exposure for losses due to the parking lot is really because of theft, let's talk about some of the methods that a garage operator can use to protect their customers' cars. The first would be to have security guards. That's pretty self-explanatory. Next would be video surveillance of their parking lots to keep an eye out on any potential people coming in to steal cars. And the third is actually having some physical barriers. Now, there's several different types of barriers. I've got pictures of a couple there. One is posts and chains, where you actually have metal stanchions with a chain connected between two of them that prevents anybody from driving through them. I will say I have seen some temporary chains that are plastic, and those are not going to prevent anything from being stolen. So they really need to be permanent types of things. And the other is fencing. You see over there on the right hand side, that's at a Honda dealership, and they actually have fencing all around the location, and they actually have gates across the entrances. And years ago, one of the ways that they used to use to, particularly for used car lots, to protect somebody coming stealing vehicles when they don't have a gate, is they would park a car in the driveway and they would take out some spark plugs so that a thief could not start that car to get it out of the way to steal any of the other cars on the lot. So that brings us to the end of the series of videos on insuring auto service garage risks. If you have any questions about the subject matter in this video, please leave them in the comments section below or email us at richard.uwresource@cox.net. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. The subject matter in this video is approved for CE credits in several states and available for in-house classes. If you are interested in scheduling an in-house CE session, contact us via email at richard.uwresource@cox.net. And thank you for watching our videos.